Welcome back, everyone. This is Issues and Debates. Today, we'll be looking at idiographic and nomothetic approaches. The best way to compare idiographic and nomothetic research approaches is by comparing them side by side in a table like this. Now, idiographic might also be understood as the qualitative approach. This is the approach where you usually focus on one or a very small group of individuals and you study them in depth, while the nomothetic approach is more quantitative, so data and tables. So you would do a survey and ask many hundreds of people, for example. That is a nomothetic approach. Now, when you look at the aims, the aim of the idiographic approach is exactly that, to understand individuals first and then to generalize over a larger population, while the aim in the nomothetic approach is to find laws of behavior that apply to all humans, right? And so here you start with a big funnel with a large group of people, and here with a very small one, and you work your way towards a general law, and here you try to generalize from a single individual onto others. So it's kind of like the bottom-up and the top-down approach. Okay. Now, when you look at the examples, Carl Rogers is an example of somebody who does qualitative idiographic work by counseling people, talking to them as a therapist, taking in the subjective experience of the patient. That allows them, Carl Rogers, Mr. Rogers, to go deep into the subjectivity of that experience. Well, Skinner, our behaviorist, would say, I'm going to study, in this case, animals, and find general laws of behavior. In this case, he laid down the rules for classical conditioning. And those rules then apply not just for mice and other animals, but also to human beings. And so he found out something fundamental about how we learn, right? And so both of these studies are quite powerful, and these two examples show that quite nicely. Let's talk about objective versus subjective for a moment. The belief in the idiographic world is that you cannot objectify the experiences of a person, right? Think of the OCD example that we talked in the previous lesson about. The experience of OCD can be reduced to an underproduction of serotonin, right? But it takes away the experience, what it is like to have OCD. And so the idiographic approach would say you need to study the individual, ask them questions about their personal experience. If you don't do that, you're going to lose information that is valuable. The nomothetic approach is the opposite. It believes that all human experiences are based on the same laws that can be objectified. So if you just find the laws, you don't have information loss. You can simply apply the laws and you can recreate the entire experience from those laws. This also feeds into this discussion whether psychology is more natural science or not. How scientific really is it? Remember the determinism versus free will. So the nomothetic, the quantitative approach, is more leaning into this whole deterministic idea that humans can be reduced into factors. And if you know all those factors, you can predict human behavior perfectly. Now, nomothetic and idiographic approaches have their pros and cons. So let's see what those are. When we look at nomothetic approaches, meaning is looking at a lot of people, you can find general laws that apply to all human beings. And the process of doing that really involves very scientific methods. So you would set up an experiment, for example. You define everything very well. You do statistical methods, and you make it such that it can be repeated by other scientists as well. And so think of it like a cooking recipe that is very exact. Anybody with that cooking recipe can make the same cake, for example, and it can ensure that it tastes the same way. And so that replicability and that well-defined set of variables allows for a more scientific approach. And it is just simply a more scientific approach. The disadvantage is that individual experiences are lost. You don't know, as we said before, what is the experience like to be a person with OCD. The idiographic approach, which studies an individual, usually focuses on extreme cases. Like, remember HM, Henry Molaison, who had damaged memory system because of his surgery due to epilepsy. And so a lot of researchers spent a lot of time with him trying to work out how his memory was damaged and trying to figure out how memory works in general, right? By studying him, we were able to understand more about the general memory system in our heads and in the heads of normal people that haven't got brain damage, right? So you take an extreme case, a unique individual, and you study them because they can reveal something that you usually cannot see because it's not visible. So in the past, people thought memory is just one system, one store of memory. And the fact that HM's brain damage revealed that he could do certain things, like procedural memory was still intact, but episodic memory was destroyed, led to the understanding that we actually have different kinds of long-term memory, right? And so that is the value of the idiographic approach or idiographic approach, taking extreme examples and then generalizing onto the rest of the population. Now, the tricky thing is that these generalizations are generally very difficult to do. So you're going to have a few people that behave in that way. In this case, HM, a single individual that behaves in a certain way. Now you got to find out if you can generalize these findings to all people. Like, do all people have these episodic and procedural memory types? Or is that just an individual difference? Does every person organize information differently? And so to us, it's now obvious that everybody has the same types of memory systems or stores. But you never know. What if it were to be different after all? So you got to then design some kind of experiment to show that this can be generalized to everyone. And that then requires a nomothetic approach. So you got to go from idiographic to a monothetic approach. Now, the last thing I want to say is the best method, obviously, is a combination of both. If you are able to capture the individual experience and as well generalize quantitatively and use scientific methods across a larger population, then you have the best of both worlds. This approach is called the mixed method approach, and scientists that can do that, I think, have a leg up in terms of their ability to dig deep into and understand much deeper their subject matter than other scientists. So that is something that is a very real thing. I've got friends that do mixed method research, and it's a very powerful way of doing research. Leave a like if you liked it, subscribe and hit the bell to get notified when we drop a new video. Download these and many more slides for free, and consider supporting us on Patreon and get access to detailed mind maps and past exam revision content. If you're a teacher, get free access to ZenTeach, an online quizzing tool with ready-to-go multiple choice quizzes and automated feedback. Make sure to use this invite code, which is, like all links, in the video description below.